So let's kick back on Christianity for a minute.
Let's kick on them.
Okay. So Christians don't even adhere to all the rules in the Bible.
Hypocrites.
Bunch of hypocrites.
Hypocrites.
Show's over.
That's right.
Go home.
That's right. Go home. Boo.
But this is something we hear all the time.
100%.
Okay, so if God is good and his law is good, why don't you adhere to his law? And then what they'll do is they'll pull out Leviticus.
Right.
And they'll start reading to you, and they're like, why do you pick and choose some of these things from Leviticus and let other things go?
Right.
Let me give you a couple of examples. Mixing of crops. Okay.
Yep.
Mixing of cloth, like not wearing.
Yeah, you and me, we're struggling, bro. We're sinning right now.
Buddy. Yeah. You can't shave the sides of your beard. I'm doing okay with that.
I'm not, man. I got it. Yeah. I'm headed I'm on a highway to hell right
how
now.
How about eating shellfish?
Oh, well, I'm okay with that one. I don't like shellfish.
Look, you're going to sit there and say that somebody can't be gay,
right?
Because of a law in the Bible,
right?
But you're going to ignore this,
right?
So your morality is subjective because you're picking and choosing. What do you say?
All right, yeah, you're right, man. I guess I'll stop believing.
Yeah, that's right. No, you've undone us.
Well, I think here's where again the Word of God becomes so important. Go look at someone like Jesus,
right?
Because I mean, he clearly disobeys some of those laws.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. Vadi Bakum does a really good job of responding to this, and you can catch him on YouTube. He's a minister, and he's been involved in a lot of things, but he breaks this down so well. And he talks about this. He says, I can point to you in the Bible how I justify every action I take or don't take.
100%.
Says, but you can't.
Right.
Right. So you're also picking and choosing now which ones you'll follow. But I can tell you why I'm picking and choosing, and you can't tell me why you're picking and choosing.
100%.
Right. And so let's break down a few of these things. And I'd love to go into this with more depth somewhere down the road. But the first thing that's first is when we talk about Old Testament law,
right?
The law that we've said time and time again that we are no longer under,
right?
We are under grace,
right?
Has three components: moral law, civil law, and ceremonial law. Okay, so moral law reflects what is right and just. It identifies acceptable behaviors. The example for this is the Ten Commandments. These are timeless laws, right? This is morality,
right?
So this is what we've been talking about today: is this will always be right and this will always be wrong, right? The next thing is civil law. So civil and criminal laws for the nation of Israel were recorded in Leviticus, Deuteronomy, all of those, right?
Right.
Numbers. Not every governed law is about morality.
Right.
Some of it is about societal needs and practicalities. So penal laws, sentencing for theft and murder. So we know that the moral law says that murder is wrong. It's the civil law that tells us what the cost for that should be, right?
Right.
Health laws, sanitary codes, inheritance laws. There is no imperatives for the church or any nation to adopt the ones that the people of Israel used.
Right.
Because too much is different societally. Right. What they did may not work for us.
Right.
Right. But these were the things that God prescribed to them for that time.
Right.
Okay, so that was civil law. Ceremonial law is the other one.
Right.
First of all, if you're not believing in God, then none of these matter.
Right. Yeah.
But if you do believe in God, the ceremonial law governed how people of Israel approached and worshiped God. They had sacrificial systems, religious feasts, ceremonial purity, health, and dietary laws. And these laws, the primary purpose for these laws were to set them apart from how other nations practice worship.
Right.
Right. And a lot of these laws are now outdated and unnecessary as Jesus has fulfilled that law.
Right.
So let me give you an example of that. John 4:19-24, Jesus meets the woman at the well.
Right.
The woman said to him, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, and yet you Jews say that in Jerusalem is the place where you must worship." So this was ceremonial law.
Right.
Jesus said to her, "Believe me, woman, that a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know because salvation is from the Jews. But a time is coming, and even now has arrived, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For such people, the Father seeks to be his worshipers. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. So here's again an example of Jesus fulfilling these laws
100%.
and showing her that some of these laws are intended to change.
Well, Jesus flat out says it. Like I think it's with someone caught in, he's questioned on the question of divorce. I got to find the verse. I was just thinking about it, but he's questioned on the topic of divorce, and he straight out calls it. He says, like, you made that law because you couldn't follow God's law. Like this was another law because you couldn't get the right one. And I think that's what's important. Like, this is what's so funny. Like, the Jews have 18 commands they have to follow, like, of the law. What's really interesting is that God didn't send Moses down with 618 commands, with laws. He gave 10.
Right.
And so what happened was we couldn't meet those 10, so we made 15, and then we made 20, and then and so what Jesus is even doing with the woman at the well is saying, look, these laws were created because you couldn't keep the most simplistic laws.
Yes.
And there's a time coming, when those simplistic laws will be unnecessary because I will be sufficient in everything you need.
Right. And he also,
spirit and truth.
He also makes this comment about how salvation comes through the Jews, but then he talks about how it is going out. And this again was kind of ending this concept of God's people and making it more globally God's people.
Right.
We see this again in Acts when Peter sees the vision of the things brought down from heaven, and he says, I cannot eat of these things. He says, do not call unclean what I have called clean.
Right.
So again, you can point to these things and see where the law was fulfilled and where it continued.
Well, so here's one that I always, I don't think it's on. I was just looking at the list. I don't think it's on here, but I always see people are always ask me about this one, which is like sexual laws.
Yeah.
Because they're like, well, the idea that like Jesus never talked about homosexuality. That's something I've heard. Or Jesus never really talked about like, Another one. Here's one. And this is legalistic. I will say it is legalistic because I do think there's a truth. There is nothing written in the Bible, at least not that I've ever really seen, explicitly saying don't live together before marriage. But this is kind of the lust thing, right?
Yes.
Like don't. Why would you open that door?
Why would you do that?
Why would you do that? And so I always tell people, are you sinning? I don't know. You got to tell me some more information that I don't want to know. I was like, but I would ask you, why do you think is that wise? And that's what something like Paul and Jesus would even say. But here's what I always say when people talk about like sexual stuff like that. Jesus with the woman caught in adultery is a prime example of Jesus upholding a moral law of some sort, right? Because we talked about this last session. Like he says, go and sin no more. So he says what she did was wrong. Now, granted, he gives grace. That's where our God is awesome. But he still says it's wrong.
Yeah.
And don't do that. And so he is still upholding a law.
Yeah.
A morality.
To your point, he affirms the moral law that adultery was wrong.
Exactly right.
Where he refutes them, because all these things they did to him were traps.
Right.
Was they wanted him to unjustly enact the civil law.
Exactly right.
Which was the stoning.
To kill her, yes.
Right? And the problem with that, and as he points out, a lot of you needed to have been stoned.
Right. Everybody needs to get killed, yeah.
If I do this, but I don't do that, then you have caught me.
Right.
Right? So there's some parts in that where you look at that. And someday we're going to do a podcast about all the things Jesus never said.
That's awesome. Yeah.
But so we'll get into that.
Right.
But you're absolutely right. Jesus upheld a moral law while showing where other things fell apart. There was
ceremonial law. Jesus doesn't. He picks grain on the Sabbath.
Yeah.
So he's clearly showing us there are some, and he doesn't. He encourages his disciples to do it.
Yeah.
Even they're like, Jesus, we can't do this. And he's like,
and when they get called out on it, he explains, you don't understand the heart of the law because you don't understand the lawgiver.
Right. You don't understand the moral.
Yeah.
Like the moral, and I think that's a funny thing is we talk the moral of the story. Like that's what it's talking about. What is at the heart, right? That's
so much of why he spoke in parables.
Right.
I had a teacher in college who talked about the going from the old covenant to the new covenant and what we were under. He said you think of it as the cross being here, and then everything hits that cross, and only some of those things come out on the other side. And here's the thing: all of the writings in the New Testament show us that the early church navigated the transition from Old to New Covenant.
For sure.
And there are a number of things that kind of occur. So, like, as we saw here, Jesus prophesied in John 4 that the way we worship was going to change and would no longer be ruled by ceremonial law.
Right.
And then both Jesus and the apostles affirmed the moral law and commanded that we should leave immorality behind.
Right.
Things like hate and murder, covetousness and theft.
Right.
But also sexual immorality.
Right.
Right. And so here's where, when people try to say, you pick and choose what you want, it's like, we didn't. God picked and chose what we wanted.
Right.
And what he wanted us to keep was what is the moral law.
Right.
And you're trying to take something that's in the moral law and put it in the civil law or in the ceremonial law.
That's why Jesus says, I came to fulfill it. What he's saying is, I am fulfilling all the things that you couldn't do, right? Because that's the civil law.
Yeah.
All the things you couldn't do, I am fulfilling. That doesn't change God's commandments.
Exactly.